The Constitution of the United States was set up so that if you were wronged by someone else, you shouldn't be the one footing the bill.
Are you and your family at risk on the roads because truck drivers aren't following the rules about how long they're allowed to be driving? That's what we're going to find out, because that's what we're going to ask the lawyer on this episode. Hi again, everybody. I'm Rob Rosenthal with AskTheLawyers.com. My guest is Kentucky attorney Tad Thomas. I want to remind you that if at any point you have questions about your specific case, you can go to AskTheLawyers.com, click on the Ask a Lawyer button at the top of the homepage, and you can ask away right there. Tad, good to see you again. Thank you for helping us out as usual.
No problem, Rob. Good to see you.
So let's just talk about regulation for trucking companies. Who regulates them? I'm guessing there's a lot of those regulations.
Yeah, absolutely. The biggest one would be under the U.S. Department of Transportation. There's the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, and they're the primary regulator for commercial motor vehicles. You also have each state that has their own Department of Transportation as well, and then some localities, but far less so.
So there are rules about how long a driver can drive without taking breaks or rest. Why is that important?
You know, it's important because, the studies show that these drivers try to go beyond what they're physically capable of doing, and they start to fall asleep. And as we all know, distracted drivers, tired drivers, drunk drivers, they're hazards on the road. So that's why regulations were put in place to put a cap on the number of hours that these drivers can drive. It's no different than a pilot and how many hours they can fly in a week. There's new rules or different rules that apply to commercial motor vehicle drivers as well.
It would seem, Tad, like common sense would figure in, and a driver would go, you know what, I'm too tired to drive, I'm lost, I'm not as alert as I should be, I'm going to take a rest. But that isn't the case, and why not?
It's as with any business, these guys are trying to make money, and sometimes they push themselves beyond the limits, and sometimes they're pushed beyond the limits by their companies.
Okay.
The companies say you got to get from point A to point B in a certain period of time, and they have no choice but to go over hours in order to make that distance over that period of time. So, federal government put in these strict regulations about time limits. You have some of the better carriers, some of the bigger ones that actually have computer modules, though, on their trucks. And so when they hit that limit or they're getting ready to hit the limit, they get an alert. And if they hit the limit, that truck will actually, shut down within a period of time. So the drivers know that they can't go over. But those are the better companies. Some of the smaller fly-by-night companies obviously don't have that technology and frankly push their drivers more.
Do some drivers, do they keep a written paper logbook, or is at least all of that usually computerized now?
It's more and more computerized. There still are some paper books out there, but not many. I remember in the old days, it wasn't unusual to find a driver who had two sets of books, the ones they kept to turn into the government at the weigh station, and the other they kept to get paid. And amazingly enough, they had more hours than the ones when they got paid. But now it's mostly all electronic. Again, the bigger companies have pretty highly technical computer systems that really try to crack down on cheating. But it's mostly electronic anymore.
And those electronic black boxes, for lack of a better term, are those able to be used as evidence in a case?
Absolutely. It's the better technology cuts down on the incidence of this happening. But when things do happen, for us lawyers, it actually becomes a harder case because now we have to have computer scientists and we have to know how to download the data without contaminating it. And we have to know what we're looking for in these computer systems. So yes, in just about any computer that's on board of a vehicle, there's data that can be pulled from those computer systems, whether it's the time clock or the speed, or there's something called VORAD, collision avoidance, they sometimes can be used. But yeah, just about any kind of computer can be downloaded to get that data to use in our cases.
Is that one of the reasons why it's important to get, if you're injured in a collision with 18-wheeler, get somebody like you started early? Because I imagine that stuff can disappear if somebody doesn't tell them not to erase it.
Yeah, that's a great point, Rob. What happens is you really need a specialized trucking lawyer in these cases, because we know to send out what's called a preservation of evidence letter to the company and to the driver, because they have documents and they have data, but under federal regulations, they're only required to keep that information for specified periods of time. So if you have a lawyer who fails to send out that letter ordering them to preserve evidence, then the data can be lost, and you've not done your job as a lawyer. So we handle a lot of trucking cases. We make sure we send that letter out. We point to the federal regulations that say you have to preserve this kind of information, what information we want them to preserve, and that goes out in every case where we have a commercial motor vehicle.
But if somebody is, say, injured and they maybe have a hospital stay and they wait to contact an attorney until maybe they're out of the hospital or something like that, sometimes that could be too late.
Yeah, it can. You have evidence issues at the scene. We really need to get, in a lot of cases, an accident reconstructionist out to the scene as soon as possible. Just because you waited 2 weeks, though, doesn't mean you don't have a case. Right. Still contact a lawyer, because there's certain things that we can do. And if there's been, a police investigation where they've gone in and done a reconstruction, things like that, a lot of times we can use their data. But it's always the sooner the better, so that we can get our experts. I'll tell you, with every trucking company that's out there, their insurance companies have contracts with experts and law firms where they have these rapid response teams. And if there's a serious collision, I can promise you their experts and their attorneys are on scene the day that it happens. Whereas sometimes we can't get there until days later or weeks later. So the sooner the better. That's
good to know. So let's talk specifically about Kentucky, Tad. Kentucky has no-fault insurance. How does that affect these kind of cases?
Sure. What no-fault insurance in Kentucky does, and you have that on your vehicle as a vehicle owner, if you have proper insurance, and you have $10,000 on your insurance policy. The reason why it's called no-fault is you can use that money regardless of who's at fault, even if it's your own fault. So you can get your medical bills paid, you can get some of your lost wages taken care of, up to that $10,000. There's tricks to actually maximizing that if you have health insurance that your attorney can kind of walk through to kind of help you maximize the use of that $10,000. That's another reason you want to get to an attorney quickly. You can also reserve that $10,000 specifically for lost wages if you know you're going to be off for a long period of time. But that is there on your policy, and your attorney should know how to handle that for you.
If after using your services, I get some sort of an award through the courts, do I have to then pay back the insurance company for what they may have paid?
It all depends. Typically on no fault, the answer to that is maybe. If you settle the case and you reach their what we call policy limits, so the most money that they can pay you on a liability policy, you may not. And in a lot of circumstances, you don't have to. In Kentucky, that's worked out between the insurance companies on the back end. So sometimes if you go to trial, you may have to include that.
So, Tad, some people, specifically commercial trucking companies, will say that lawsuits against their carriers, that it's bad for business. It runs up prices for everybody. What do you say? What is your perspective on that?
Look, it's the Constitution of the United States was set up so that if you were wronged by someone else, you shouldn't be the one footing the bill for your medical expenses, your lost wages, and your pain and suffering. It shouldn't fall on the victim. It needs to fall on the person who's responsible. And yes, that trucking company may have to raise their rates in order to pay for the damage they've done. But one thing everybody agrees on is it should not fall on the victim. And so, you should reach out to a lawyer, and you should, get what you're entitled to.
Do you feel like without the specter of, hey, we could face a considerable lawsuit, that there would be more rule breaking?
Oh, absolutely. We get really concerned about any legislation, for instance, that's enacted that gives someone immunity. If they get immunity, why would they have any reason to follow the rules? Why would they have any reason to make things safer? The answer is they wouldn't. So yes, it's a lot of times, these lawsuits don't only compensate the victim, but they deter conduct in the future. I'll give you one example. We settled a wrongful death trucking case, and one of the things in the settlement we required was for them to change their policies and procedures and change the way they trained their drivers.
Wow.
And so, that's a specific example of where the civil litigation system not only compensated the victim, but actually made changes to protect other people on the road.
And I'm sure you've heard it time and again. A lot of times, people who are victims in these kind of accidents, some money isn't going to make their life whole again, but oftentimes they'll say, I just want to keep it from happening to somebody else.
Absolutely. And the family that I represented in that case, that was their biggest concern. They didn't want to see someone else die on the road at the hands of this trucking company. So they required changes be made. And it's a good thing. And it makes you feel good representing a family that's their priority.
Absolutely. Lots of interesting and helpful information as always, Tad. Thank you for making some time to answer our questions.
Anytime, Rob.
That's going to do it for this episode of Ask the Lawyer. My guest has been Kentucky attorney Tad Thomas. Remember, if you have questions about your specific situation, you can go to AskTheLawyers.com, click on the Ask a Lawyer button up at the top of the homepage, and ask away right there. Thanks for watching, everybody. I'm Rob Rosenthal with Ask the Lawyers.